He was not particularly tall and his face resembled that of many other middle-aged men. However, it was his decency that the courtesans appreciated. Suddenly the thief stopped eating. Ukko looked at him with curiosity. "What is the matter? This is awful. You do not like locusts." "This is not a locust," the man said, holding one of the bugs in his chopsticks. "Isn't it? They might call everything a locust around here, but farmers make a distinction." "What sort of distinction?" Maomao and Ukko looked closely at the man. He went to work on the mountain of stewed bugs. He picked them up one at a time and took a bite. Then he separated them into piles. The ratio between the two piles ended up close to 8-1. These are locusts. Farmers stew them and eat them. But these are grasshoppers. They look alike, but grasshoppers taste terrible. Are they really that different? Ukko asked. He had never realized the two were so distinct. Nor had Maomao. She had always mentally classified them together. Take a bite and you will figure it out. When you remove the legs and stew them, they all turn the same color. This means the less honest sellers can offer them to merchants who don't know the difference. Grasshoppers make real locusts seem inferior. Aha! Mr. Owner would have been the perfect target for a trick like that. With only one locust for every 8 grasshoppers, the dish was naturally terrible. Maomao took a locust and put it in her mouth. The thief was right, it had more body and a better flavor. The man looked at the grasshoppers with a grim expression. Before Maomao could speak, Ukko said, "If something is happening, tell us." The man said there might be a famine this year. At that, Maomao practically jumped toward him. "You think so too? Hey, now I cannot be sure. But when you get more grasshoppers than locusts in a year, it usually means a plague of insects the next season." It was a simple matter of the ratio between the two. That matched what Chu-Yu had said. Maomao looked at the man again. "You seem very knowledgeable about bugs for a guard. I also remember that room had many things in it that were more obviously valuable than a set of encyclopedias. Yet you chose the books. Why not just leave them? Wouldn't a thief normally choose something easier to pawn?" The man scratched the back of his neck, looking somewhat abashed. "I actually didn't want to sell the encyclopedias. But you told the bookseller you would be back with more later. You have to be friendly with those types, otherwise you can't get a decent price." "I was also hoping to buy it back if I could find the money. Nobody would willingly buy an encyclopedia." Maomao almost said someone would, but she stopped herself. The man clearly only had the clothes he was wearing. It was still winter, which was fine. His face was quite grimy. He was so dirty that Maomao had hesitated to let him into the apothecary shop. Regardless, he wouldn't easily earn money looking like that. He had lived in confinement at the stronghold. "I was the one who brought him his meals." Maomao's eyes widened. This was unexpected. They brought him there to make some kind of new drug, but that wasn't the only thing he was researching. What else was there? "This right here," the man said, indicating the grasshopper. "You mean how to prevent a plague?" So that was what her predecessor had been trying to discover. Maomao swallowed hard. She was about to ask the man another question when a loud crash happened. The shop door flew open. "Hey Freckles, can I eat your dumplings or not?" It was Chu-Yu and he was holding a skewer of dumplings in each hand. The thief blinked several times. "Wah, young master." Before he could finish speaking, Maomao grabbed some medicine she had been pulverizing. She flung it into the man's open mouth. That is bitter." He practically convulsed. She felt bad for him, but he had been about to say something extremely inconvenient for all of them. She would do it again if she had to. I should have realized. Of course he would know about Chu-Yu. He had said the whole reason he helped her was because Chu-Yu had asked him to. Publicly, the Shi clan had been destroyed completely. The fact that one of them was actually right here was bad news. Chu-Yu watched the man flail with evident amusement. He seemed to wonder what this ridiculous stranger was doing. "Yes, sure, eat the stupid dumplings," Maomao said. "Just go away, do not shoo me." "What am I, a house pet?" Chu-Yu complained. He must not have recognized the man because he paid him no mind. "Hey Chu-Yu, how about I let you ride on my shoulders?" "Whoa, really? Awesome, let me up." Maomao was grateful to Ukko for his well-judged distraction. "I can't be sure, but I ought to let him know at least," Maomao thought. She crooked her fingers, counting the days until Jinshi would visit again. Chapter 3. Sleep. 3 days later, a masked noble appeared at the apothecary shop as the sun was crossing the meridian. "Welcome." "Thank goodness you're here." Jinchi was set back on his heels by Maomao's warm greeting. Gaeshun's mouth hung open behind him. He was clearly wondering what had happened. "Hey, what's the matter? Zyrama, you do know that is Master Jinchi before you, right? You haven't confused him with someone else, have you?" Maomao scowled. Both reactions were ridiculous. Gaeshun glanced at Jinchi, knowing he had accidentally let the wrong name slip. He was greeted with an annoyed look from behind the mask. Jinchi entered the shop and seated himself on a round cushion. The place was not very spacious, so Gaeshun retreated to the front room of the verdigris house as he always did. Once the sliding door was closed, Jinchi finally removed his mask. There, as ever, was his beautiful face, and the scar along his cheek that never failed to look out of place. The stitches were removed. It looked far less painful than before, but even so, it was enough to make a person sigh with regret for the sheer wastefulness of it all. People had started writing entertaining tales of the Shi clan's rebellion from the last year. The hero was the emperor's beautiful younger brother. Lulan played the villain. Some might expect Shishu, the leader of the Shi clan, to have the latter role. However, Lulan had displaced him in the popular imagination, and that scar was likely the reason. The villainess who injured this unearthly face would be spoken of for generations. When Maomao remembered the palace lady who loved bugs and laughed merrily, she felt a desolate feeling. Jinchi said, "I thought you had something you wanted to tell me." "Oh yes, she did." Maomao took the encyclopedia she had brought down from the bookshelf. "What is this?" she asked. Someone opportunistically plucked it from the flames of the stronghold and sold it. She would keep quiet about the former guard for the time being. He was under the care of the verdigris house's chief manservant, Ukko. Ukko would know what to do with him. The man who had fled the fortress decided to start calling himself Seizan. Maomao had wanted him to use an assumed name. She did this just in case his real name caused the little brat, Chu Yu, to remember his past. Fortunately, Seizan did not seem to have a strong attachment to his former name. He was now learning the business from Ukko. We were able to recover the books he had sold. Ukko had acted quickly to gather them up. Seizan said he had sold them to a procurer who was known to Ukko, so the chief manservant spoke with the other man and bought the books back from him. So there was only one problem remaining. I believe the final book is located at the fortress, and I really want to obtain it. Jinchi gave her a questioning look. "Why are we collecting these books?" Maomao decided the best response to that question was to show him. She set a bowl of food before Jinchi with a rather loud thunk. It was a mountain of stewed bugs, and they were not a very appealing color. Jinchi frowned and moved back a little. "What are those?" "They are stewed locusts, though the main ingredient is actually grasshoppers." Maomao picked one up with her chopsticks and held it toward Jinchi. He backed away again, but soon found himself stopped by the wall. He simply crumpled to the floor. "I'm not eating that. No one said anything about eating it." Maomao put the grasshopper on a plate. She took out a piece of paper with a picture of 2 insects on it. It was a comparative study of a locust and a grasshopper. The study had been based on the fried versions, but it captured the essentials. She gave Chuyu some pocket change for the work. She said, "It seems grasshoppers increased in number last year. Were there any complaints from the farming villagers about damage from insects?" Jinchi's face clouded, and he scratched his head with a sigh. He said, "Yes, we had some reports. There was significant damage to farms in the northern region. It was not enough to cause starvation, though. Fortunately, the year before had been cold, which helped to take care of the bugs. They were wiped out before they could increase uncontrollably. Devastation from locusts can continue for several years." "What do you plan to do this year?" Jinchi's mouth twisted. Perhaps the question had already occurred to him. Maomao suspected the northern region had largely belonged to the Shi clan. With them gone, responsibility for governing the area would fall on the emperor. "We're planning to cover for last year's shortfall by distributing some of the excess from the south, but they hadn't yet planned further ahead than that, it seemed." Jinchi had a furrow in his brow worthy of Gaeshun. "If it happens again this year, things are going to be hard," Maomao said. "People would claim the plague was a sign that the emperor was not ruling the country properly." "They are just bugs, you might think. However, such plagues had spelled the end of more than one nation in history. And for this to come the very year after the emperor had destroyed the Shi clan, what would the people make of that? Maomao thought it was ridiculous superstition, but in the minds of many, the connection could not be dismissed so easily. The emperor and his relatives had to rule those who readily believed things and those who doubted everything. Jinshi said, "An insect plague is a natural event. What are we supposed to do about it? Should we set up bonfires to draw them away, or should we go out and swat each one individually?" He was right, of course. Such an effort would be unsuccessful. Maomao said this while holding the encyclopedia toward Jinshi. She had received this volume from Seizan, the runaway from the stronghold. The book had many notes written in the margins. "There is another volume dealing with insects, and since it is not here, I think it might be back at the stronghold." The volume in Maomao's possession said nothing about grasshoppers, yet it was unimaginable that such a common insect would go unremarked upon in such a thorough book. "Also, I believe the apothecary who was at the stronghold before me was researching something about grasshoppers." Truly, yes, although I do not know how far his research got. It had been desperate, though. Jinshi stroked his chin thoughtfully, then opened the door and called for Gaoshan. He was just putting a skewer of dumplings in his mouth. He immediately went to summon one of the menservants from the verdigris house. Chu Yu, who never missed an opportunity, spotted the abandoned dumplings and helped himself. "I should be able to procure it within a few days. I would appreciate that." Maomao let out a long breath. This did not mean things were over, but it did bring some relief for something that had been swirling in her mind for some days now. Jinshi looked pale, however. He often seemed fatigued recently, now that he could no longer pretend to be a eunuch. And what Maomao had said only added to his workload. "Tired, sir? You could say that, but I'll be fine." He had big bags under his eyes. However, the officials and court ladies around him did not seem to notice them. In fact, they seemed to think he was doing well. Even with a scar on his face, his beauty was still almost superhuman. This often threw people off. They seemed to think it was a sign of good health. He is going to collapse if this continues. People whose senses became dulled by fatigue eventually stopped realizing how tired they were. If Gaoshan insisted that Jinshi was fine, there was nothing she could do to stop it. He needs some sleep. If he had time to come all the way out here, he should have spent it resting in his room instead. Maomao looked at him with some exasperation. "Master Jinshi, wouldn't you like to rest? What is this all of a sudden? I will prepare a bedroom immediately. I want you to sleep." Maomao was looking right at him, and it was impossible to avoid noticing the scar on his right cheek. She realized she might want to study the neat stitching in detail, and dropped her gaze to the ground. She would certainly want a good look at her old man's handiwork. The careful stitches were covered with ointment. Jinshi would likely be left with the scar, but it would heal quickly, and she wanted to observe its progress. "Do you want me to sleep in a place like this?" Maomao ventured a joke. "Can't you sleep on your own?" She thought he might resent being spoken to like a child, so she started to add, "That's a no," Jinshi said before she could finish. "No, I can't." He seemed lonely when he was by himself. "I understand." Maomao peeked her head out the door of the shop and called to a nearby apprentice. She asked the apprentice to call the madam. "What is it?" the old lady asked, not with much enthusiasm when she arrived. But when Maomao explained what she wanted, a light began to shine under those baggy old eyelids. "Give me half an hour." Was that really enough time? Maomao thought, but she proceeded to leave the madam, who suddenly seemed quite invested, to her own devices. Instead, she offered Jinshi some restorative tea. "This way, please," Maomao said, directing Jinshi into the verdigris house. She led him to a room on the top floor, a chamber appointed with the finest furnishings and a very large bed. Incense was burning, filling the space with a rich, sweet scent. "You may rest here, sir. Work is important, but you must take care of yourself." She had half expected the madam to simply dismiss her. However, the old lady seemed to have a plan. She offered the establishment's best room for free. She had prepared it in 30 minutes. It was an impressive display. Perhaps she thought it would be best to make a good impression on someone of noble birth. "If you would like to bathe, a medicinal bath is ready for you. If you would like pajamas, you can use these." Maomao handed him a set of soft cotton sleepwear. Jinchi looked surprised at first, but his smile grew progressively more gentle. It wasn't the smile of a celestial nymph, but it could still have melted the heart of any woman or man. I believe I shall bathe, Jinchi said as he headed for the adjoining bath. The tub, filled with hot water painstakingly brought by the menservants, was the perfect temperature. They must have struggled to boil the water and then bring it here before it cooled. Maomao felt a wave of relief. It seemed the furrow in Gaoshan's brow softened as well. He was in a corner of the room. And yet he also seemed uneasy. I shan't be sleeping alone, Jinchi reiterated. No, you shan't, sir. On that count at least there would be no question. Jinchi opened the door to the bath with an inscrutable expression. Then he immediately slammed it shut again and scuttled back to Maomao in a tizzy. His scurrying looked comical. He was wearing his mask again. Why are there scantily clad women in the bath? He demanded. No need to worry, sir. They are professionals. The guy could hardly peel his own tangerine, so Maomao figured bathing himself was out of the question. She had asked for clothing to be ready for him, just as it was when the emperor bathed. She also thought he should get a massage. Don't you like massages, sir? He asked. Does it stop at a massage? He ventured the question. Often not. This was, after all, a service industry. And if the customer requested it, many practitioners would add extra services that were not always openly discussed. Everyone knew that was how the pleasure quarter operated. Still going to have that bath, sir? Thank you, I'll pass. Would you like a change of clothes? I can do it myself. Jinchi took off his overgarment and pointedly put on the sleepwear himself. Maomao observed that he was surprisingly well built, although she had no particular emotional reaction to that fact. She picked up the overgarment from the floor. She folded it neatly and put it away in a chest. It still carried a wisp of perfume, an aroma that conveyed its owner's excellent taste. Maomao took a cup and a small teapot from the bedside. She poured something for Jinchi. He lifted his mask and took a drink. Sleeping medicine or something. Maybe it tasted a little funny. Perhaps Maomao should have taken a sip to show it was safe. It contains nutrients to boost your energy, sir. Jinchi spat out the tea. Maomao found herself completely drenched. She could not help but give him a bit of a scowl. Why in the world would you give me that? I have heard it is the most effective remedy when a man is tired. Do you mean what I think you mean by that? What else could I mean, sir? The look on Jinchi's face was a mixture of disgust and shyness. He seemed to be making that sort of face a lot today. Perhaps there was some problem with her being so direct. Jinchi was a man, but maybe he was still embarrassed to hear biological facts stated so plainly. He was still young after all, and maybe he wasn't as mature as he often looked. She felt bad for acting like he was an animal who would be in rut all year round. Even so, his reaction seemed a little strange. Probably nothing worth worrying about. Jinchi couldn't seem to look Maomao in the eye, but she continued. So what kind of woman would you prefer? Huh, he said, sounding a little foolish. Maomao clapped twice. This caused a group of 5 stunning ladies to file in from another room. Each of them looked sweet and innocent. Lady Suhyun told me you prefer them to be your own age, Maomao explained. Suhyun was Jinchi's caretaker. She could be mischievous, but she was a first-rate attendant. Given Jinchi's apparent fixation on chastity, they had endeavored to find virgins. This was all the more desirable because they were certain not to have any diseases. Getting enough women from the Verdigris house alone proved impossible, so they used their connections at several other nearby brothels. The madam wasn't pleased, but it was necessary if they wanted all these virgins on such short notice. The women were told only that a noble was involved, and that was enough to secure their participation. They were all the more intrigued by what they glimpsed of Jinchi's beauty beneath his mask. Yes, Jinchi must have caught the eye of many a young woman, yet at the moment he was simply standing with his jaw open. He looked at Maomao, and his total befuddlement was obvious even behind his mask. In the corner of the room, Gaoshan had moved past holding his head. Now he was pressing his forehead against the wall. Are none of them to your liking? Maomao asked. The assembled women, not Jinchi, reacted to this. Each woman began to gesture at Jinchi, trying to appear as attractive as possible. Maomao said none of them have yet known a man. The madam herself had inspected them. It is easy to guess what that inspection involved. Jinchi, moving awkwardly like a puppet, looked at Maomao. I just want to go to sleep. Please let me rest, I see, sir. Then just pick a woman, any of them, I mean literally, he exclaimed. Maomao's shoulders slumped and the courtesans left the room in a collective huff. Instead, Maomao went over to Gaoshun, whose shoulders were even slumped more than hers, and said, "Would you like them then, sir? I have a wife. A scary wife, and my daughter is something of a stickler for cleanliness," he said. Of course. Maybe it wasn't the best idea to offer courtesans to a married man. Do you know what it's like to be told, Papa, you're filthy? You have to bathe last tonight. Yes, sir, I do. I know how his daughter must feel anyway. She did feel bad for Jinchi's attendant having to stand around, though, so she offered him a nice sofa to sit on.